And I really struggled with what I wanted to call it. Do I call it, internationaleducation.com or drsherrylee.com? And I was like, no, I wanted it to be meaningful, and I wanted the website to express.
Really see that you've been able to apply your work with an international student even to the...
Friendships will solve a lot of problems, but of course friendships can't be manufactured overnight. You can't get it from a vending machine. You can't quite rent a friend. And the poem is called Finding My Way Home.
Kia ora and welcome to Voice of Aroha. My name is Rata. I'm with the beautiful Charlotte Wells here, and I'm so excited to be introducing our incredible guest, Dr. Sherry Lee. Now, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how are you doing today, Sherry?
Well, Rata, Charlotte, thank you so much for having me here today. It is one of those cold Wellington evenings, but we are cozied up in your lovely studio. So I'm Sherry. Please do call me Sherry. I feel a bit awkward when someone goes, Dr. Lee or Dr. Sherry. I do not know where to turn. But that's me. And I came to New Zealand about 10 years ago. I'm originally from Singapore. I started off in Hamilton. I had a dream. I wanted to be a professor of international education. So I did a PhD in education. My research was on international students and supporting their peer learning. And I graduated in 2019. With a PhD, I thought, yay, hello world. I'm going to be that professor that I always wanted to be. That was not to be, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it. There weren't that many academic jobs, and there just weren't that many jobs in the university at that time. So I decided, what else can I do with my PhD? And I thought about Wellington, a place I often visited for conferences, for events, and I thought, why not? So I moved to Wellington about 5 years ago, and I've worked in the public sector for those 5 years, and it's been really, really fulfilling. I've worked mostly in education, and I'm really passionate about how we can use education, increase access to careers, how do we support thriving communities. And with my work on international students, and by extension migrants, this is an area where I can't help but feel that I'm part of the fabric, and I can't help but feel I need to strengthen that fabric. So thank you for having me here, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you so much, Sherry. That's beautiful. How are you feeling today, Charlotte?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. Thank you so much for providing such an insightful background about yourself. It's extremely inspiring to me because international education is the field where I completed my degree, and I'm still able to do lots of opportunities working at ETC English Teaching College with my international students. So I'm really excited to hear your experiences working with students, but also being an international student yourself.
Thank you, Sherry. Could you tell us a little bit about your own story of migration and how that led you to want to become an academic and want to become that dream of being a professor and studying migration so academically as well?
Okay. I will have to go back to probably more than 20 years ago. I studied English at university. That was the National University of Singapore. I thought, okay, everyone says I can write, I can read, why not English? I also studied linguistics, and I kind of fell in love with the idea of English. How did this come about? So Singapore is a former British colony. We take English for granted because it's the language that we speak, we learn in school, we're expected to use it and use it well. But then I started asking, who owns English? Does anyone own English? If you speak it, you own it, don't you? And so that started my fascination with understanding why people learn English, why people use English. And actually, there are many Englishes, many accents. Why do these matter? Where you're from, how you sound, and what kinds of words you say or don't say. And so I guess since then I've been interested in how people communicate across cultures, and it has led me on to different careers. I've been an English teacher in China. I've worked at a conflict management center, the mediation center. I've been a lecturer at a polytechnic. But all through those jobs, the one thing that I suppose is a thread that ties it all together is my kind of fascination with how we communicate. What kind of tools do we use? How do we do it effectively? I did my Master of Arts in Teaching part-time while I was still teaching at Polytechnic in Singapore, and that probably opened my eyes to the world of research. I was amazed at so much work that has been done trying to understand the goals of English language learners, how we help them learn English, but more than that, their identity and what learning English means to them. And that was almost like a turning point, an aha, the goosebumps come. And I thought, yes, I think this is what I want to do. I think this is a worthy pursuit to understand why people want to learn English, how do we support them, but more than that, what does language open up to? What doors do they open? And I hope that kind of answers the question of how did I end up wanting to be an academic? Yeah, I think it started off with long ago, you think about what inspired you, and through all these life experiences, I thought, why not? Why not make the world a better place through that?
I think it's incredible how many experiences you've had and how many different places that your passion has taken you. Sort of, I wouldn't have expected, especially for a lot of people who go into academia, kind of they're very narrow, narrow-minded, quite focused on their passion. But it seems that it's really brought you everywhere, and especially very, very, very interesting places. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, that was an extremely insightful discussion, and I can really see that you've been able to apply your work with an international student even to the public service and everything like that, which is really amazing, and I can relate to doing that myself as well. So we're going to be asking you a question in regards to your online platform. So can you tell us about your online platform, the Diasporic Academic, and why you created it? I've read it myself. It's very insightful.
Okay, well, you're one of the few people that asked me about that, so thank you. I think when I was finishing my PhD, I wanted to be able to have a way to express my thoughts, to talk about my research, to just write about the things I was interested in, things about international education, supporting students, migration, or anything I wanted to write about, really. I love writing, and in fact, one of my long ago dreams was to be a writer. Never paid the bills, but hey, it comes in handy in lots and lots of work. So I wanted to create an online presence. I read a book about how to be, a great academic. They said, well, get a website, brand it. And so I did. And I really struggled with what I wanted to call it. Do I call it, internationaleducation.com or drsherrylee.com? And I was like, no. I wanted it to be meaningful. And I wanted the website to express the things that connected all my interests. And I landed on Diasporic, the Diasporic Academic. And it comes from the word diaspora, which means communities that have left their country to settle in a different country. I much prefer the word diaspora or diasporic as opposed to migrant, ethnic, women of color, communities of difference. And I find the word diaspora or diasporic is really rich. It talks about that the connections that you have with your home culture. It talks about the fact that you are relocated. You might be dislocated. A lot of our refugee communities have been displaced, and yet they have their communities, a diasporic community. So I guess that was kind of the backstory behind my website. And it just gives me an ability to post something when I've got something to share. I have received some nice feedback about it. I don't think I'm entirely famous through their website, but Charlotte, if you can inch me closer to the top 10, why not?
No, I've really enjoyed reading that myself because I'm just so interested and passionate about stories of international students and their identity construction and formation. So thank you so much for providing that wonderful answer.
Charlotte, would you like to ask the next question, Sherry?
Yes, sure. So what unique challenges exist for migrants coming to New Zealand trying to survive and thrive in education here? I'm very interested in your answer.
I think New Zealand has quite an interesting culture. So before I came to New Zealand, and I've never visited New Zealand, I visited the US, I've been to Canada, I've been to Australia. I thought, I'm quite well traveled. And I thought, New Zealand, surely, you probably must be like all these other countries I've visited. Kind of white, English speaking. How different could you be? How wrong I was. It was quieter than I expected. It was kind of quite, what is the word I should use? I think people were really friendly, but I really found it difficult to make friends. And those kind of basic needs, I guess, as you have as a newcomer, feeling welcome, finding friends, being able to communicate, felt quite challenging. And I was quite surprised because I thought I was quite well traveled. I speak English. Why was it so hard to communicate or to understand or to make friends? And I think coming from that perspective, I guess one of the challenges for any newcomer to New Zealand would be to understand that culture of wanting to be able to keep quite a small circle of contacts and friends and family and be quite happy with that. And it's certainly not to say they're not friendly. No, on the contrary, people were willing to help, to say hello. But I kind of reflect on how deeper relationships took a much longer time to build. So I think for a lot of international students, when they come to a new country to study, one of the things that they really want are friendships. Friendships of locals. That would be a real dream, to go to a country that you've always wanted to study in and make friends from there. When I was an international student at the University of Waikato, I had lots of friends from different countries all over the world, but very, very few local friends. And perhaps it was our shared interests as international students. We were here for a similar reason. We bonded together. It was easy to get along. With local students, they had their own context. They had perhaps their own lives, their own routines. And they might have seen us as perhaps temporary guests. And it's not really a criticism on anyone, but it's just the nature of how, I guess, through time, through history, that's how we're seen, or how international students can be seen. I certainly don't want to perpetuate this. I certainly think there's great opportunity for more friendships, and I think a lot of challenges that international students face, whether this is loneliness, anxiety, mental health, can actually be addressed through friendships, cross-cultural friendships.
You're absolutely right about that. I love your answer, and it's interesting because it really makes me reflect back to my own university education, where I was one of the only New Zealand European students that actually made in-depth friendships with international students. A lot of them have now gone back to their home countries, but I'm in touch with lots of friends in Vietnam and Japan and China, and it really enriches my life. It also made me think of a research study about Vietnamese international students, and the participants talked about this yo-yo relationship with the Kiwi students, where it would go up and down, and they would feel like there were friendly conversations, but there was always a gap. I think one of the participants says there was always a gap. There wasn't really any opportunity to go in depth with them. So it was really interesting how you have observed that within your own life, and I do wish that universities would take more responsibility to build like genuine and deep connections instead of more superficial ones. So thank you so much for that answer.
I guess also you touch a bit on common misconceptions and stereotypes that especially, I guess, New Zealanders may have about migrants, or perhaps I should say about diasporic communities here, and people from them. How do you think people can, or we can address those kind of stereotypes that maybe they're here only for a short time and it's not worth investing the time in those friendships, or just other stereotypes in general?
That's a really tough question, because I was about to say friendships will solve a lot of problems, but of course friendships can't be manufactured overnight. You can't get it from a vending machine. You can't quite rent a friend. I think if there are New Zealanders, if there are Kiwis who already have friends from diasporic communities, migrant communities, ethnic communities, I think they're the ones that can start the ball rolling. They can say, I'm going to invite a few friends over to come to this event. They can be the broker, if you like, and that's a concept I used in my own PhD research about bridging the two worlds. And we have to start somewhere, but we also have to start from a place where it's easy enough to start, otherwise it just wouldn't happen at all. So I guess if nothing else, I'm reaching out and calling out to those of you who do have friends from different communities, different ethnic communities, to be the one that perhaps consciously creates that culture, creates that community where you do sort of exchange those cultural insights. So to start the conversation or to enrich it with your own understanding. I think the one thing I do love about New Zealand is the fact that everything starts with you. It starts from the ground. It doesn't take a policy to make friendships. And please, no, do not ask for a policy change to make friendships. I don't think it will work very well. But it takes the heart, it takes the mind, it takes the person to say, yes, why not? I'm going to bring along a few friends, and we're going to enjoy our time together, and I'm going to help my friends make other friends.
That's a beautiful, beautiful explanation, but I think also a very, very heartwarming call to action for really everyone listening. I think in terms of everyone who's got some friend, just to invite that community to come join with you. And I think that's it's a lot of what makes the world a better place is that aroha, is that love and empathy, that sort of being willing to try and maybe even take a risk and try inviting someone who might be a little bit uncomfortable for you, that maybe you don't know a lot about, but actually that you can get a lot of benefit from, and can really enrich your own life and enrich your perspectives as well. So what a beautiful call to action, Sherry. Thank you very, very much for that.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much for that. So we already are starting to touch on the concept of brokering, which is very interesting. So can you tell us a bit more about how the present education system operates for migrants? So thinking about like tertiary, also even high school and primary, and explain the role of brokering in ESOL groups, for thinking back to the school system and how the gap can be bridged.
Charlotte, you ask all these big questions. I think I can really only respond from a place of observation and participation. And when I say observation, it's when I'm not in the system, but I see it through the things I read from other people's experiences. And so I guess from the perspective of someone who's interviewed international students, from the perspective of someone who is very close to the work of English language partners, for example, I can say that depending on what visa type you're on, you have access or no access to English language support, for example. So if you are a migrant, that is, your visa tells you've got a resident visa, whether that is through a skilled migrant pathway or from a refugee status background, that entitles you to government-funded English lessons, which is free English lessons. If you are on a temporary visa, if you're on a work visa, if you're on a student visa, then you are not entitled to government-funded English lessons. For the international student, I guess it's seen as a transactional one. You've come here to learn English, you pay for lessons. If you wanted extra support, you can look to your university for that, if that was the case. It becomes a bit trickier if you want a different type of visa, like a temporary visa or work visa. I'm thinking specifically of partners, of workers who are here as partners, but who don't necessarily have the language skills for them to interact with different parts of society. So they seem to be caught in a gray area where they don't have the right visa type to enroll in free English lessons. They're not in a situation where they access English language lessons easily. They're not necessarily in a university or in a school setting. So where do they go? But I'm pleased to also observe there are lots of community groups who do provide that sort of wraparound support. And so again, coming back to the point of, if you are already a friend in the ethnic community, or if you know, then that's the bridge you play. So that's from a viewpoint of an observer. And I'll go into my viewpoint as a participant. And when I say that, I'm speaking from the viewpoint of a parent whose children have gone through primary school, intermediate, and high school. Now, I guess my children, we speak English at home, so they wouldn't categorize them as ESOL students necessarily. But when we did come to New Zealand, it was quite a cultural shock. in many regards. And if I was observing my children and their classmates, if they needed extra support, extra help, that would get from the ESOL funding. So I suppose to answer your question, Charlotte, about what are the things that I know of that can affect migrants, is again, how are you classified? Are you classified as an English learner? And I suppose the easiest definition is from a different country. That would solve it. And that will allow you access to funding for ESOL support. So that's one thing I've observed, at least at the primary school level. When you get to the intermediate high school level, and let's assume that children are kind of really quite well socialized, it's not so much English language anymore. I think it's more about integrating with the school community. And I've experienced quite painfully my children, are experiencing some unpleasant interactions with their classmates. Sometimes it happens and it hurts. Sometimes it's upon reflection, and you think back, oh, what happened there? And these are things that are quite difficult to talk about. And again, if you don't have a community and you don't have a safe space to raise these things, then it becomes quite difficult to address them. I've been along to parent groups, and again, it depends who are these parents and what do they talk about. So some parent groups, they talk about fundraising and baking and doing all those things, which is great because you do need to raise funds, perhaps to support a building project or a particular need. But then what about issues that are quite difficult to talk about over tea and coffee? And those are the things that I've been, I guess, a participant as a parent. And I suppose those are the things that I like to raise an awareness of, simply because I think a lot of migrant parents, if I can use that phrase, I'm losing lots of words. I don't know what to call them. If I don't say it, you don't know what I mean. So we just use the term migrant parents. If migrant parents feel uncomfortable or difficult or tiring to talk about these things, then they won't. Just get on with life, because there are more important things to do. And yet, because we don't talk about them, then there's these things that we kind of say, well, okay, we'll toughen up, we'll get over this. It's part of growing up. And I'm not for one suggesting that, racism is rife in schools. All I can say is that society is complex. Mental health issues have been, more and more entrenched in a lot of young people's lives. And we live in a world where we are bombarded by social media 24/7. So when it comes to issues of belonging and inclusion, this adds another layer to quite a complex set of issues.
Wow, thank you so much. That was really interesting to observe, and it does sadden me that there are still these issues going on within the New Zealand school system, but honestly, I'm not surprised at all. And it is something that needs to be addressed within some of these meetings. It's hard because often, again, they are quite on the surface level and don't really go in depth too much. But thank you so much.
Thank you also for sharing your own personal experiences there, and I think a lot of people can definitely relate, or to our viewers listening can probably definitely relate, and I think everyone's experienced some sort of negative experiences at school, and we all know what the world could be like, so it's very helpful to hear that, I think, as well, so thank you, Sherry. Just going back a second, I was wondering if you could explain for our viewers who probably aren't familiar just with the term brokering and how that kind of operates, just quickly in the landscape.
Sure.
Thank you.
Well, it's my favorite subject. What do you know? So I guess the word broker is probably more familiar in terms of the financial services, where you want to buy shares and you can't do it, as someone out there in the street. You get someone who's your broker who has access to those share markets to buy it on your behalf. And then if you earn some money, hopefully he's going to, pass on that profit to you. But when we talk about brokering in a social setting, and I'm talking specifically about the setting in terms of your culture and your language, brokering is a phenomenon that occurs in a lot of migrant communities. So in my research, the kind of literature I was looking at was about language brokering in the US, where you had migrants, Chinese migrants, you had South American migrants, you had Spanish-speaking migrants, you had refugee migrants, and you had their children translating on behalf for their parents. And that body of research just captured my imagination because that was real, that was ongoing, and that was practical. And yet there was also a lot of pressure on the children who had to do translation for their parents, things like bank statements, important letters from schools, how to access things. And so that just led me on to read more around the subject. And when I decided to do my research on international students in New Zealand, I thought surely brokering occurs among the international student community, but what does that look like? Who are they going to for help? Who are the ones? Who are the brokers for these students? And so as I did my interviews, I had a hunch that if a newcomer to New Zealand, an international student, had some questions about their homework, the last person they would ask is the lecturer or a New Zealand student. I just had a feeling it wasn't going to be them. True. Yay. Yay for my hypothesis. But what actually did happen? They were certainly reaching out to students who shared a similar cultural or language background. It wasn't really their classmate they were looking for because they were kind of equally clueless. They were looking for someone a little bit more knowledgeable, a bit wiser, preferably a bit older, who has been there, done that. And so they typically reached out to those in the next year, or at least have done a semester. They were like ahead of them. And the conversations that I analyzed were mostly on social media, like WeChat and Messenger. And they were really amazing. They were very social, lots of emoji, lots of how you're doing. But when it came to about asking for help, the interactions were kind of embedded within that kind of social, casual interaction. Hey, how you doing? Hey, can I ask you a question? Sorry to disturb you. Okay, what's up? Do you know what this means? Oh, it's that. Oh, cool. Thank you. Emoji. Good night, nighty face, and all of those things. So, based on their existing kind of peer relationship, they found it easy to ask, and they did. All times of day, particularly at night. Thank goodness I didn't have to, crouch somewhere around the corner trying to record a conversation. Everything was done online, so it was quite easy to get that. But I guess the point I'm making is that when I decided to research about what brokering practices were like for an international student community, I discovered that a lot of things happen on the basis of friendships, of really safe peer groups that people felt they could understand each other already because of language, because of culture, and that made it much easier to ask for help. And that is something that I think happens in a lot of newcomer communities. I know people might say, hey, but don't you want to encourage them to interact with others? Didn't you, Dr. Shirley, just talk about cross-cultural friendships? Yes, I did. It also takes time to build that confidence, to be able to move from a same culture group to cross-cultural groups. And again, it's the broker that comes in that I keep referring to, the one who has traveled in both worlds, who has friends in both worlds, and who can then introduce one world to the other.
Gosh, that was a beautiful explanation. Thank you very, very much. I think we've touched on, again, it's coming back to friendships, and I think coming back to a lot of those key takeaways for me as well, actually, I think in my life in terms of what I can do to make this world a better place. So putting that question to you, Sherry, what do you think, it sounds like you may already have your answer, but what do you think a more inclusive and accessible world for education looks like for our migrant and diasporic communities, and do you have suggestions on what might help bridge that gap to make it a reality?
Well, Rata, you're learning from Charlotte, asking those big questions. I'm thinking again about New Zealand because it's such a unique context. I'm from Singapore, and Singapore has a very top-down, paternalistic culture. The government decides lots of things, and the citizens happily agree that it's a great thing, and we're quite used to rules and regulations to the point where we're expecting for the next set of policy to direct our lives almost. And I contrast it with New Zealand where, yes, of course there's a government and there's a policies, but a lot of people just don't really want to be told what to do. And if there is a way to make us a better place, more inclusive, to increase belonging, I think it really boils down to the relationships that we have. And I go back to the point about those that have already decided that they do want to have cross-cultural relationships. They enjoy these friendships. And is it starting with something that's already positive? That, if I can say, I'll start with a school, for example, a lot of schools, they do have international students, and they are here for a season. They might be here for a few years. But if we can use that as a platform to say, this is why we have international students. They want to learn something from us, and we want to learn something from them. So I think in a lot of schools, there already exists activities that help to create belonging, that help to create inclusion. I think it's about being more intentional. I think it's also about having champions, cheerleaders with the invisible pom-poms going, yeah, let's do this. Why not? Let's invite someone to come and give a talk or do something. It takes a lot of effort, I know. But I think it just takes that spark to keep the fire going. Yes. So I'm going to suggest that we create a few more sparks wherever we go, and then we try to keep the fire going. It has to come from the heart. It doesn't come from policy. It doesn't come from funding. I'm not saying money's no good, but I'm saying it needs to come from a place where people see the beauty and they want to have it and they want to grow it.
That's gorgeous. Thank you so much, Sherry.
Yeah, that's really out of this world. I can really relate back to international student events that I participated in at Victoria University when I was studying, and there was definitely a lot of spark there at times, and they did build some really deep interactions. I participated in like a conversation class where I was one of the Kiwi volunteers, and we had some really wonderful interactions. We had like a cultural dinner, we had New Zealand movies, and we took the students out for trips, but it actually did get quite in depth because of how regularly we were doing it. So there definitely was spark there, so thank you so much.
We're running a little bit low on time, unfortunately. I'd love to talk to you all day, but I think we'll probably have a couple more questions. Charlotte, would you like to ask about Sherry's poetry?
Yes, definitely. So you have released a poetry collection 2022, which sounds really interesting. And she's actually got the book here, which is called
For the camera, yes.
How to Be Different, How to Be Me, Poems about identity and culture lost and found. So that is really interesting. Can you tell me a bit about why you think sharing personal narratives, art pieces, and literature is important for migrants, and also how this affects our society for these viewpoints to be heard?
Is that your final big question for the evening, Charlotte? If it is, then I'll answer the question.
Yes, thanks for today.
I'm just teasing. I think, I'm not going to talk about the big world issues. I'm just going to talk about why I wrote the book, and perhaps that will answer the question. The first time I wrote poetry was when I was 15 years old. I remember sort of going to a class, learning about poetry, and go, I could do this too. And I wrote something. It's probably not very good, thinking back, but I wrote something, and I wrote more. And so I wrote lots of poetry when I was a teenager into my early 20s. I had some poems published in Singapore in anthologies. That was cool. Yay. And then I became an adult, found worked, got married, had children. And that kind of just took over life, or life happened, as they said. And then kind of fast forward to the time now where I guess I can say I'm kind of settled in my new home. And I thought, I think I used to write poetry. I think I'd like to write poetry again. And it came at a time where I was trying to figure out, so who am I now? I've been in New Zealand for 9, 10 years? Who is it that I say I am? How do people see me? How do I tell them who I am and what I do? And I started to write. You could say that COVID probably kind of nudged me towards that, because it was time of, who am I? Am I still in this country, or do I have to go home tomorrow? And out of I guess a lot of poetry, the best poetry, I believe, comes out of moments of despair, of longing, of desire, of hope found and perhaps lost. And so this collection of poems was a way for me to write my emotions, to make sense of it, to capture what triggered me and what I learned from those experiences. I've had a great opportunity to share the book with friends. I even did a little Facebook kind of live event reading poetry just to see what it was like. And I've been really kind of touched by the feedback with people who've read my work, and they said, "Wow, you've really spoken the feelings in my heart as well." And if poetry can do that, then why not? It certainly has a place for communities that have a lot of unspoken needs, unspoken desires, unspoken difficulties. And if they can find a way to say it without shame or any kind of backlash, I think, why not? So through film, through dance, through art, through poetry, that is the space for you to be who you want to be. And let's see where that art form takes you. For me, it's words. And where the words take me, I hope is to a place where the people can relate. I was going to ask you, I'm not sure if we have time, but could I read a poem from the book?
We'd love that.
Awesome. I'll read the first poem because I think it's something lots of us can relate to. And the poem is called Finding My Way Home. I left home in a hurry, our lives in four-wheel suitcases and backpacks, convinced the children and myself about the adventure we were going on. Squeezed my husband's hand as we walked through the departure gate, buckled up, took off, flew through time zones, and arrived all worn out by the weight and clunk of our useless treasures, with the faintest memory of home. I left the memories of friends behind as we wrapped up the loose ends, over nice words, feasts, and gifts, frozen in time, intact over the distance, the images scattered across Facebook and Insta feeds, filling the tedium of mindless addiction, numbing the cumulative years. I let it go. The approving nods of relatives, paper proof of my intelligence, dazzling street ads that make me needy, the moral compass and its broken needle, the fear of losing the game rigged from the start. And now I start from scratch. I am building a new home. The foundation is barely finished. Walls come plastered with labels that justify our existence. The mirror reflects the outlandish dream that got us here. We get lost in the neighborhood, so we retrace our steps barely marked out by breadcrumbs the birds left alone.
Thank you so much for that. That's beautiful. Can we buy your poetry book somewhere?
Yes, but I'm going to gift this copy to Voice of Aroha
That's
for
incredibly
saying
kind.
thank you. It's on my website. If you want, I don't have that many copies of the physical book, but I am in the midst of putting together a digital bundle with a PDF version with some reflection questions and a recording of that poetry reading session I was telling you about. So all in the works.
That is so exciting. I just have one final question, which is very interesting. It's a bit more simple, but as my own study was around international student identity formation and resilience, I'm very interested to hear your observations and experiences of you seeing international students form their flexible identities and also examples of resilience. You may have had these yourself, or you may have observed your classmates or friends. So I'm just very interested in that.
Simple question you say, Charlotte. I think it means something different for everyone. And when you say international students, they really come in all shapes and sizes. They come from different backgrounds, different aspirations. We might take a broad brush and say, you all have these problems, you all have these dreams. We could do that. Or we could let each one in a very, very Kiwi way, to work out what it is, to work out their path. It won't be easy. And so I bring back the idea of friends. Whoever they are, wherever they are, that's going to help them become more resilient. And through, I guess, that struggle, that's how you build resilience. It doesn't come easy, it doesn't come cheap. But as international students, they've already decided to embark on a journey. And so the journey of resilience is yet another layer that I think because they've decided to come to a new country, they have those resources somewhere inside of them. They just need someone to encourage them to keep going.
Our lucky last thing that we do, our little tradition, potentially should have warned you on Voice of Aroha, is we have the book that Bachman is pointing at. So we also have a question written from our last guest. We don't tell you who the guest is, we won't say what it is, but you can read out what this question is and read your answer. And then we will invite you to ask a question for the next guest who's going to come onto the show. So we're going to ask you today, if you could change a moment in history, when would that be and why?
This must be the biggest question of the night. Gosh, Charlotte, I thought you were tough.
Feel free to take your time. That is quite a question.
Is this being recorded?
Yes.
Oh, gosh. Okay. Oh, I'll be here all night then. Oh, dear.
Don't worry. And you'll get to be equally as mean or lengthy to the next guest afterwards.
I guess it's taking me a very long time to answer because I really believe a lot of things happen for a reason. And I know it's a difficult thing to say when you think, don't you want to change war? Don't you want to change decisions that led to bad things? I honestly don't think I'm in a position to say I wish I could change that because I'm part of this world and I find it extremely difficult to change the course of history when I'm not the author of history in a way. So actually, I wouldn't change anything. I don't know if you're familiar with the concept, I think they call it the butterfly effect, of when you change something, it actually triggers a whole series of other changes. And I mean, look, I'm not a scientist, but I kind of take that view. If you decide to change one thing, it doesn't just affect that one thing, it affects a whole series of other things. And I kind of think about if you wanted to be happy, you first needed to know what it was to be sad. If you wanted there to be peace, you needed to know what it was to have conflict. And I'm not one for suggesting that we should let wars happen or should be happy that wars happen. No one wants these things to happen. It pains me. It's terrible. Terrible things happen. But out of a lot of things that happen, we grow with them. And I think it goes back to the idea of resilience. Why do we even have the word resilience? Because there are things that are really tough that we can't help but to face them. So how do we overcome the tough things, the bad things? That's resilience. How do we overcome it and become, stay intact or become better? That's resilience. It's a difficult idea, I think. I know many people would probably disagree and say, no, you should say we end war and famine and poverty. I could say that, but I think the answer would be very hollow because I am in no position to order the world. I am part of the world. But what I can do is to make sure I can do what I can to overcome, to help others overcome, and go on this journey together.
That was amazing. Thank you so much for that answer. Extremely inspiring.
This has been an incredibly inspiring interview. I think you've got so much wisdom, and I think we can all appreciate so much the words you've said. For everyone who's listening and watching and wants to hear more of the incredible wisdom of the wonderful Dr. Sherry Lee, we greatly recommend you visit her website, the Diasporic Academic. If you look that up, it's the first thing that comes up. So I hope hope everyone does. And really, really, really appreciate all of the incredible wisdom that you've given us today, and this lovely, lovely conversation. I think we've touched on a lot of the key issues that that really affect all New Zealanders, but especially you've given us some big opportunities for how to make a better world. So through love and through the generosity of you in this conversation, for sharing your perspectives, we've been very, very, very lucky to have you. So thank you again so much. Again, go on to Sherry's website if you want to see her incredible poetry.
Am I supposed to put us to the camera?
Yes, thank
Okay.
you. And we're just really appreciating having you so much today, Sherry. I hope you have a lovely rest of your evening, and it's been such a gift to have this interview with you. So thank you so much again.
Thank you, Rata. Thank you, Charlotte.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was absolutely amazing, and you've really inspired me because it's a topic I'm very passionate about, and I can't wait to follow your future journey as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you to all of our listeners. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, whatever time it is, and I hope you really appreciate this interview too. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.